First of all, I would like to start by saying that we seem lately, the last 15 years at least, we go from crisis to crisis. We had the financial crisis in 2008, we have the climate crisis, we have wars on the continent of Europe, we have all kinds of challenges. And let me try to give it a reason. And I think one of the reasons from our perspective, and when I say our, I mean the HR profession, the human behavior, is that there is an increasing diversity. Now, there was always diversity, but the Japanese were in Japan, the Americans were in America, the French were in France. Let me give you a statistic. 15 years ago, in Amsterdam, 15% of people didn't have Dutch parents. That's already a high number. Do you know what is the percentage today? It's 57%. So in 15 years' time, we went from 15% to more than 50%. And I was in Miami, and in Miami there was a sign, "We speak English here." Now, they were lying, it was all Spanish. The point I'm trying to make, people have mixed, and not only in nationality, in gender, in generation. And so we have created a diversity of diversity. Now, fine, but what's the problem? How does that lead to crises? Now, first of all, our models are not really made for dealing with diversity, because our models are both culturally biased and bipolar. Let me explain what I mean. Cultural bias is that the nationality of the author, for example, in leadership, there are about 250 books written every year on leadership. And if you read the American book, you smell, oh, that's typically American. If you read a French book, it's all about, were you at the École Polytechnique? Are you male? Are you from Paris? Oh, I understand the book Les Grands Patrons for the French. And there is a Chinese book on leadership, and it's all about yin, yang, Mao, and Tao. Now, why I'm saying that, we know this. But in Amsterdam, where we have 57% who are not Dutch, by birth at least, what book will you ask them to read? Do you become the American leader, the French leader, the Chinese leader? And the problem is, the book still has to be written. We need a new paradigm of leadership. And I'm giving this as an example, but everything we read is culturally biased. And that doesn't work in a diverse environment. Point number two, most of our models are bipolar. Now, you're in HR, so I think MBTI is the best example. If you take the Myers-Briggs test, then you see that if you score high on thinking, you score low on feeling. What kind of nonsense is that? Why are my feelings done at the cost of my thinking, and vice versa? While Carl Jung said that the quality of thinking depends on how you connect them to the feelings. Icons of bipolar thinking are MBAs. In the Netherlands, better known as mediocre but arrogant. And I teach MBAs, and I have an MBA myself, so I know it from the inside. And it's quite interesting because if you take MBA education, the typical question you ask, why would an organization centralize and why would an organization decentralize? And you get lists of why they centralize, like economies of scale, consistency, control, and you decentralize for flexibility, being close to the customer, etc. And I say, okay, but now answer the question but first think. And obviously they get a bit nervous. And I help them by saying, what is the only reason for centralization and the only reason for decentralization? And the point is that I want the answer that the only reason for centralization is decentralization. Because if you're not decentralized, there's nothing to centralize. Now, let's take our human body. Our human body, is that centralized or decentralized? And we all know the answer is yes. Now, if I look at organizational culture surveys, very often they measure the degree to which you're centralized or decentralized. Why can't you be high on both? Because that's a sophisticated system. Okay? Now, cultural bias and bipolar models don't help us to deal with diversity. And that is that's all our work. And I met Charles Hamilton Turner at Shell when he said, Fons, you have done research on the 7 dimensions of culture. And one of the measurements is, are you rather individualist or communitarian? And he said, if you're an individualist at the cost of the community, you're an egoist and it doesn't work. If you're a communitarian or a collectivist at the cost of the individual, you're a communist and it doesn't work. So if both ends of your scale don't work, why don't you try to combine them? And the combination reads a bit like great individuals are great because they give it back to society, and great societies nurture the excellence of individuals. And that took me quite some time to understand that any value disconnected from its opposite leads to a pathology. And our models are inviting us to do so. In cultural studies, it's called stereotyping and what have you. Now, what is the alternative? And the alternative, let me show you, is 4 elements. Innovation is one. You get to the idea of innovation, you get to the idea of globalization and leadership. Now, let me connect those 4 in one sentence. Globalization leads to different viewpoints, of which it's the essential role of a leader to connect, which is another word for innovation that leads to sustainable results. And our models are not inviting us to do so. So let me give you hope that creating wealth, to be innovative, is always linked to how to connect opposites, which are very difficult to be joined, therefore scarce, therefore very profitable. Now let me give you an example or two. What is Apple doing to be innovative and creating wealth? They have combined beauty, aesthetics, with functionality. And everything that is beautiful of an apple, like having no frame, is also functional. Because if you swipe it, you don't break your nail. Another example, Formula One. What is the big dilemma in Formula One? It is speed and safety. Now, normally you separate the two. You're either safe or you're speedy. Every engineer in Formula One says, how can we be even faster by increasing our safety? And vice versa, how can safety help us to be even faster? And aerodynamics is the answer. By the speed, you get more downforce, therefore safer. And you see that the races are won by aerodynamics, by the reconciliation of the dilemma. And that is something that also happens in HR. And let me try to not be too, let's say, provocative. A lot of people, even MBTI people, that have made their life out of Myers-Briggs, they love it. And they say, yeah, but Fons, you are enormously provoking because we know people have 2 hands, but one has preference. And what we're measuring is preference. By the way, I do the same with culture. But my point is that the paradigm needs to be about clapping. And the beauty about clapping, it's about coordinating opposites rather than looking for preference. In fact, the preference with clapping disappears. And that is quite interesting. So I'm not negating that it doesn't have a function, but we need to go beyond it. Now, we have some approaches. We recognize the differences so we can capture diversity. Then we try to respect both sides, which then turns into a dilemma that we need to reconcile. And finally, what we need to do is, what as a leader do I need to offer people to make it work, to realize the results? And let me give you some examples. First of all, let me go back here. Leadership, essentially, I've said, what is leadership that works across cultures? First of all, a leader distinguishes a problem from a dilemma. Not everything is a dilemma, but if it's a dilemma, they don't make choices, they combine. So the only choice a leader needs to make, is it a problem or is it a dilemma? And when it's a dilemma, never make a choice, but ask the question, what can we do with one side that helps us to get more of the other side? Now, let me go to some evidence, because a lot of people, and this was published in a book called The 20 Leaders for the 21st Century. And we looked at the degree to which a leader reconciled, the competence of reconciliation, which is based on the 4 R's, and their success by 360 or by other measurements. And it was close to 0.7. It's the highest correlation you can find between success of a leader and the competence to integrate opposites. And I have in every lecture showed this and measured this. And HR says, interesting, inspirational. And they go back to the bipolar world. Interesting. Now, what is the alternative? Now, if this is the old model, I would say crack the line. So in cultural studies, you're obviously German, a rectangle, and you're Italian, smoothly an oval, an ellipse, a circle, if you like. But what we want to teach is that there is a point of unison at the top, and that's called the shadow of a cylinder. And the big advantage of that is that the spiral, the helix, is a dance between opposites. So the whole includes the parts. It's a bit like Europe and being German and Italian. Let's look at what we share, and that's the cylinder. Now, we would like to give you a little overview of culture. Now, if we had more time, I would ask you for a buzzword. What is the word that comes to your mind if you say culture? And you hear values, behaviors, beliefs, you hear tradition, etc., etc., etc. And I love, because culture is a lot. I love the work of Ed Shine, who says culture is like an onion. On the outside, we have explicit culture. It's the language we speak, the food we eat. It's the observable part of culture. And you will see that these are just the artifacts and products, the expressions of culture. But we have to go one layer deeper, and then we attach a value to that product. So if everybody eats a Big Mac, that's fine. There's nothing against Big Macs, although let's not discuss it here. But people might buy a Big Mac for different reasons. And that's where the value comes in. The value is a shared orientation of what we define as what we desire, and a norm is what we think we should do. Now, if I ask you, what are the norms and values of Europe? People will say, yeah, do you mean Sweden or Italy? Or you ask in America, North America, they say, do you mean East Coast or West Coast? And both are right. And that's a point that any culture is a normal distribution. So we have Americans, and on the other hand, we have the French. And they are normal distributions. And we very often talk about what we call the stereotypes, the extremes, rather than the overlap. Because what the French and the Americans have in common, for example, is that they both like to control their environment. Quite different from the Japanese, by the way. Now, the opposite are stereotypes. Now, final point, I will stereotype in a second, but I will warn you that, first of all, it is a stereotype, an exaggeration. And secondly, don't judge it. So if the Americans say the French are always late, and the French say the Americans always sue you, don't judge. There are good reasons why there are lots of lawyers in America. And there are good reasons why French tend to be a bit more flexible with time than Americans. Now, let me leave it here in view of time. But when the value becomes a norm, it slips out of consciousness and becomes a basic assumption. That is implicit. You can't see it, you can't smell it, but it's a value that has become a norm. It's a bit like oxygen that has become a norm called breathing. And if you're healthy, you don't think about breathing every 5 to 10 seconds, but it's still a value. Now, there are three areas in which we have basic assumptions in the way we deal with human beings, with time, and with nature. And I would like to give you a bunch of examples and how it relates to the role of an HR manager and the process of reconciliation. Let me start with a very popular one, and I hope you will, let's say, forgive me if you know the example, but I have some extra things I would like you to think about. The first one of 7 is the tension between rules and exceptions, what we call universalism versus particularism. And that is introduced by an example I always give because it's such a clear example. And it's our first question in our survey to measure cultural differences. And that is, you're riding in a car driven by a close friend of yours. Your friend is speeding, going 50 kilometers an hour where you're allowed to go 30, and he hits a pedestrian. You come to court, and the lawyer of your friend says, "Don't worry, you're the only witness." Wow. Now, you're in court in front of the judge, and the judge asks you, "Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, how speedy was your driver, now he would not say your friend, but the driver, how much kilometers was he going? You know it was 30. Would you say 50? 40? What would you say? But first question is, what is the right of your friend to expect you to lie? My friend A has a definite right as a friend to expect me to lie. Some right, no right. And then the second question is, would you lie, yes or no? Now, may I just ask you, who would like to be in this situation? And I know the answer, because I do this almost every day in workshops. And I've never had a participant who raised a hand. A nice situation to be in. Why? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, there's nobody in this session that doesn't want to help friends as a principle. But at the same time, there is nobody in the room that would not have something with the truth. So the dilemma is shared amongst humanity. There are many nationalities that you are representing. I've done this in Nigeria, in Seoul, in New York. Believe me, there's nobody ever who said that this was not a dilemma. But then culture creeps in. And what you see is you get different approaches, right? So culture, in fact, numbs, pushes aside a value. There is a preference of values, but the dilemma is human. And that works because perhaps in America you would say C, not even perhaps, I'll give you the data in a second. And in Korea, perhaps you would say, no, I need to help my friends. So they react differently on the dilemma. And in fact, culture is the way we approach dilemmas. And the dilemmas are human. So let me go one step further. And that is to explain what we're measuring here. So the universalistic, rule-driven ones say, it's all about standards, rules, norms. It's the letter of the law, and you need to be rigorous. On the other extreme, we find the particularists who say, no, it depends. Be flexible. It's the spirit of the law. And If I ask you, what makes you a good leader? The left hand side or the right hand side? Yeah, you might say it depends on your culture. But in a multicultural group, a great leader would say, you know why we need consistency at the top? Because it allows us to be flexible. Because flexibility without consistency means chaos. And consistency without flexibility means bureaucracy. And both don't work. You need to combine. Now, we know that there is a cultural preference for left or right, and I'll show you in a second. But it's also interesting to know that companies know the differences. Let me go one step further and show you the differences. These are the percentages of people, and we have done this amongst 140,000 people by now, that says, my friend has no right or some right, and I will not help by lying. So you see that Switzerland, US, the more Protestant cultures are at the top. And at the bottom, you see India, you see Venezuela, you see the Latin cultures, very much more like, I need to help my friend. Now, the risk if I would stop here, and most of my colleagues in cross cultural thinking stop here and say, we are different, be careful. Yeah, but the risk then is that the people at the top, Northwest Europe, North America, and the more Protestant groups would say, these people at the bottom, they're corrupt. They always help their friends. Till I did a workshop with, in fact, it was South Korea. And a Korean came to me and said, Mr. Trompenaars, I knew the Americans are corrupt, and you proved it. I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, you can't trust them. They won't even help their friends. And I think both are right, because it's a dilemma. The top is not better than the bottom and vice versa, but they might lead to pathologies. Now, companies have also given their function away. And it's interesting. So the diversity of diversity is also by discipline. So you see that finance and HR people are more universalistic. A rule is a rule. While you go in marketing, by the way, sales dropped off the chart because PowerPoint can't deal with negative scores, but it's much more particularistic. It depends, right? Now we have a site, and in the download of the question of the slideshow, you can get a QR code, and it allows you to look at all the scores of the 140 countries that we have gathered on all 7 dimensions. It's a free, accessible site, so go there and have fun. Here we are for other cultures. You see, it gives you a definition of the dimension, and it gives you tips. And here is the QR code. So have a look later on if you want to play with the dimensions and know how countries score. By the way, we are developing a game that helps you also to playfully get into the knowledge of a culture, and it has complexity levels at the end. So in the beginning, it's more how do you adapt to a culture, and at the end, you get dilemmas. You're a female negotiating in Japan, so rather than what to do, how to solve that dilemma. We're still working on it, and we guess that in about a month or so, it will be available. Now, here are ideas of the feedback you get in that one and the tips. And that's called the culture for business. That's more country specific. The other one is more generic. It's called culture explore. Now, a dilemma that is often raised in business is, and also in HR, are you rather global or are you local? Do you have respect for cultural diversity, which is more particularistic, or do you go for the global one? And what we try to teach in our workshops is to crack the line. And cracking the line is an invitation to combine. So we see that if you go completely centralized, globalized, you're the global corporation. It's my way or the highway. It is, we are in Detroit, and let me tell you what you need to do in the rest of the world. The more multi-local ones, here we are, if you like, the big four, from Deloitte, KPMG, and EY, etc., they have one thing at least in common, and that is the logo. For the rest, they're pretty local, some more than others, right? Be careful for the compromise. It's called the international organization. It's the Statue of Liberty with the local flag. You do slight adaptations. It's not good enough. What you need to become very often, if this is a dilemma anyway, is the transcultural organization. And it has four characteristics. It's value driven. Footnote, the popular modern organizations now use dualities to avoid the pathology of a value. So let me give you an example. PepsiCo says instead of collaboration, they say we strive for teams that consist of creative individuals. We give direct feedback with diplomacy. That's called dualities. So one, they're value driven or duality driven. Number two, they're polycentric. Look at the picture. It's rather a diamond than a triangle. Centers of excellence is a good example. Third characteristic, it's an organization that has a keen interest to learn locally, combine the best practices to next practices, which they then globalize. And finally, they have a shared idea of leadership. The leadership we believe in that helps you work with diverse cultures, or diverse cultures like gender, generation, discipline, is servant leadership. I'll finish my slideshow very soon with an explanation of the beauty of servant leadership. Now, here we are. This is an example of reconciliation. And that means in HR, for example, if you want to install a reward system and people are moving between the countries, that you need and to be locally sensitive and at the same time have a standard approach. And I'll give you an example very soon in how that could work if you are in a more collective or more individualistic culture. So that is the introduction to individual versus communitarian. So we asked the question, what is the best way to improve the quality of life? Oh, A, give people as much freedom as possible, or B, no, you have to look after your fellows, even if it obstructs individual freedom. You understand, A is more individualistic, B is more communitarian. Now, here are the differences, huge differences, with a lot of stereotypes. Obviously, in America, UK, it's more individualistic, and you see Japan, India, much more on the group-oriented culture. Okay. Now, what do you do in this little case? And let me tell you, I worked 8 years in HR in Shell. And my last job in Shell was in a research site where there was a spin-off, a joint venture. They went to Belgium, where 200 Japanese researchers on fine chemicals, by the way, went together with, let's say, more local people. Now, in Shell, local means 35 nationalities, but mostly Northwest Europeans, Dutch, British, Americans. And at a certain moment, the Japanese started to complain. And, you know, the head of the project came to me and he said, Fons, you did something in culture. Could you help me? Because the Japanese seem to be demotivated. And we interviewed them. Now, it doesn't come out easily with the Japanese, but we drew a conclusion. Everything was focused on the individual. The rewards were focused on the individual. Individuals were measured against each other in the reward system and the appraisal system. So we said, do we want to show gratitude to individual performance, or do we go for team cooperation? So again, correct the line and exaggerate the extremes in the negative. So here, if you go for the individual, it's me, myself, and I withholding information. The opposite, ask the Japanese, leads to team mediocrity if you only go for teams. Be careful for the compromise. Let's go for the small team so you piss off all. Now, how can you make this work? And I thought it was, and it worked great. We said 50% of the variable pay will go to individuals under one criterion: who's the best team player? And 50% will go to teams under one criterion: what has the team done to make individuals excel? Now, in the literature, this is called co-opetition. You individually compete to better cooperate, and you have people cooperate for individuals to better compete. Wow. And that works in any culture. So if you say we need a standardized system that adapts to local circumstances, then this would be an example. This works everywhere because it's reconciled. We go to the next one. It's about showing emotions. Very shortly, do we show emotions or don't we? So this is the question. Do you agree or disagree? If you disagree, right, then it's more neutral. Have a look. Here you see the countries who would say at the top, it's not professional to show emotions, and at the bottom, it's fine. That can create misunderstandings, but this is an obvious dimension. Let's not take it too far. My favorite dimension, and we'll come to the last two ones, because you get a sense of what we're trying to do, is the work of Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin was a German in the 30s, Jewish, good idea. He went to America, and he said in his works on his culture shock as a German in the US, Americans are amazing people, they're like peaches. We Germans, we are like coconuts. Now, let me show you the difference. Namely, a peach has a small nut in the center, which is private, but a very big accessible flesh. The coconut, difficult to enter, but once you're in for life. Now, an example on what Kurt Lewin called the U-type. There is a small privacy and a big public life. Examples, the refrigerator. In the US, you hardly know people. Acquaintances coming in, they go to the fridge, take a bottle of Coke, and you say, as I guess most Europeans, what the hell are they doing in my refrigerator? As a student at Wharton, we didn't have a car, so you borrow one. Americans, oh, take my car for the weekend, I don't need it. Have you tried this in Germany? No way, it's very private. In America, it's public. Furniture in America is public. They move, they leave their furniture. My house, having a French mother, is loaded with antique, but it belongs to the family, it's very private. Even my title was what Kurt Lewin calls a specific relationship. If two peaches meet, cut the crap, what is this about? And don't include very often the privacy. When I got my title, Herr Doctor, I thought, gee, in the University of Penn, I was introduced in the faculty club, and my tutor said, this is Dr. Trompenaars. I said, hey, this looks like Germany. But we had a barbecue to celebrate my PhD, and it was Fons. So you're doctor in the university, and you're Fons at the barbecue. That is a specific relationship. Compare that to the Germans. In Germany, you're Herr Doctor at the university. You're still Herr Doctor at the barbecue. You buy a steak at the butcher, Guten Abend, Herr Doctor. You come home, it's Guten Abend, Frau Doctor. Where are the little doctors? Now that is the German model. A big privacy, and therefore a tough way to enter it. And you will see that initially there is no relationship. It's reserved. They call you Sie and not du. But around October, Munich, this happens. And you share everything. Now, the big problem across cultures is when the peach meets the coconut. Wow, that's interesting. Namely, what is private and what is public. So the Dutch, who are very peachy for Europeans, will say anything in a meeting. While in Shell, the British were more coconuts. And the British would do the real stuff before or after the meeting. Now, this is known as loss of face. Loss of face is making public that leads, that is made, that something private is made public. And you lose face because that's not what you do. You do it in separation. It leads to different styles of communication. Speeches very often are more direct, the Australians, the Americans, the Dutch, while the British, the Japanese are more coconuts, a very indirect way of communicating. Now, the way we measure this is quite interesting. A boss asks you to paint the house. Answer A, specific. Dear boss, go to hell. Your boss in the company, not outside. Versus, it is my boss, I need to help. Have a look. Enormous differences for those people who would not help. In Northwest Europe, the Netherlands, Sweden, dear boss, go to hell. Interesting score is Japan to show you how difficult it is to do this research. Many people in Japan would still say no to their boss. And we were surprised. So we interviewed the Japanese who said, yeah, our option was not on our list. In Japan, we would never wait till the boss asks. We would offer. I come to the last. Now, here we got some feedback and the way we communicate. On the right-hand side, it is the pitch. You first make the point and then you go context, while in the UK, you go very indirectly to make the point. Now, I would like to say that the use of internet, the use of AI nowadays, combine digital with face-to-face. Face-to-face is diffuse and digital is very often specific. So avoid going on the hook of the internet, avoid only face-to-face, but try to ask the question, what can we do digitally that deepens the relationship with our people? And the intimacy of our people, how does it help us to use digital stuff more effectively? So it is the integration of high tech and high touch, and known as blended learning in training. I come to the last one. What gives people status? Is that your output, what you do, or your input, who you are? And that is a big issue across cultures. So I'll finish with leadership. Crack the line and say, is it bottom up or top down? And we measured it. There are the more bottom up cultures, achievement orientated at the top, and at the bottom, it's more ascribed status, family background, age. The leadership that works in all cultures is avoid the extremes. Bottom up. There is a book with the title Lost Democratic Leadership with the subtitle The Dutch and Swedish Disease. It's democracy over the top, it doesn't work. If we go to Russia and the Middle East, it is follow the leader, no feedback, and you all drop down the cliff. Top down doesn't work. Dictatorship is a good example. What works is servant leadership. And look at the picture. Servant leadership is the man, but mostly the woman, holding the ladder for others to climb. Sorry for this cartoon, it should be a female. Females also in our research are much better in servant leadership, in reconciling dilemmas than men. And I would like to give you some indirect evidence. Most of our heroes, politically, although they're decreasing, and even in religion. Let's take religion. Jesus Christ, Mohammed, Buddha, they were servant leaders. Mandela, Gandhi are more popular, I think, than Trump and Putin. Why? They were servant leaders. 27 years of jail, and instead of saying, let's kill these bloody whites, Mandela said, what can I do for South Africa? That is servant leadership, is enabling others to perform better. And I'll end with a little anecdote. Jesus Christ was walking on a road, and he sees a man crying. And he says, what's the matter? I'm blind. Open your eyes and see. And he could see, and Jesus happy, the man happy. He walks on and sees a female crying. So what's the matter? I'm paralyzed. Stand up and walk. And she could walk. And Jesus happy and the woman happy. And he walks on. Another man crying. He says, what the hell are you crying for? And he said, I'm a Dutch consultant. And Jesus said next to him, both cried. And I would like to say, even servant leadership has its limitation. Let me summarize. The world is getting more diverse. Our models don't work. I personally believe that we in HR need to train our people, and it's trainable, to get a mindset of saying, this is a problem, old paradigms will work, and this is a dilemma, our old paradigms won't work. The only thing that works is to have a competence to combine opposites. Thank you so much. And hopefully, we're back. There are some questions, so we can go for it.
Fons, that was really interesting. I love the speed, I love the enthusiasm, and I love the cartoons. Although you're right, it should have had a woman in the last one.
Yeah, I know for sure. Yeah.
One of the questions, the very first question that came in, reads, "It is so crucial to do team building from diverse audience, and now we have AI to include. What are your ideas, thoughts, comments on this topic?" So just an easy one to start with, right?
Yes, yeah, it is. It's wonderful. Now, first of all, in diversity, we have developed a little tool that measures three things:
Uh-huh.
the diversity of the team. So, for example, the car accident, although we use a slider, because very often teams don't have the statistical power, let's say 10 or 8, for getting big differences. So we use a slider. And it gives the diversity of the team. Then it measures what are the team issues, and then it comes with the dilemmas you need to reconcile. Now, we have said, yeah, so we leave the output of this app is the dilemmas they need to work on. And the hope is they call us and say, hey, we have a team and we do a workshop, and it's fun because we have fun with that. But now AI comes in. And I'll tell you, I'm now, the last couple of months, 6 hours a day behind AI. Can you imagine the meaning my life has given? But it is amazing what AI does. You give them the dilemma, and they say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Right? Um, and to be honest, now we have an LLM, it's called, so we are not on ChatGPT because we don't want to give it all away, 40 years of work. So we have a sandbox where we have put, I don't know if you see that. No, it's a bit blurred, but
Uh-huh. I can see those books. There are a lot of them.
yeah, and they're all written by us because we didn't know what to do. And we put the quality of what we get out is, I would say, in many cases better than we could do ourselves. Our big dilemma, here we come, is how far do you want to go with AI? Because the team needs to resolve it.
Yes.
Because part of the resolution is not a computer screen telling you this is what you should do. No, it's the team that tells each other what they should do. And this is, for me, the basic dilemma of
Okay.
where do you use AI as, I would say, a helper. My productivity has gone up by 80% now, 8 times. I mean, it's amazing. But what I feel, if I give all the knowledge that comes out of AI, you don't give enough on the process that needs to be done. So don't worry in HR, the face to face remains crucial, but it could help you to be a better facilitator of things that need to be done face to face. I hope that helps a bit, but it's at least in my opinion. Yeah.
Fons, I'm sure that helps Fatima a lot. And thank you for your question. A follow-up question around tourism, actually. Tourism is about the preservation of cultural and natural differences of destinations, yet being able to communicate with tourists in a way that doesn't close off their cultural ability to understand. How do you kind of respect the difference and that importance? Do you have any thoughts on
Yeah.
specifically culture related to tourism?
Oh, I hope that within a month we'll have a discussion because we have thought about tourism
Mm-hmm.
from digital tourism like TripAdvisor and,
Yeah.
and Trivago and Booking.com to hotels, hospitality areas, is that our game, which is fun to play, gives the basic hints, let's say, to avoid blunders. Just to give a bit more, in a nice way, insights into the culture. By the way, the game is built on quizzes,
Uh-huh.
and there are racing cars, obviously electric cars, so they don't make a noise. And so if you have a lot of good answers to the questions, and I hope, hopefully, yesterday I was in Budapest and I come into the room and there is all kind of things on the screen in your room, uh, that there is also a little, learn about the culture in tourism. Um, and perhaps it doesn't need to go as far as dilemma reconciliation as a case. But I think it's important, but it should be playful because the tourist wants to be having fun
Yes.
about the differences. And I did some work with John Cleese, who said, and Darko said also in the beginning, the importance of humor. Humor is when two opposite logics both turn logical. And that's what our game, it has a lot of also little jokes about the country, but not painful, just funny jokes. Like,
Yes.
why in the Netherlands, let me stick to my own culture, are there so little refrigerators? Now, because if you close the door, the Dutch can't see if the light is out. Yeah. Now, that's lighthearted. I hope I have not insulted all the Dutch in their thriftiness. But um, he gave an example, by the way, and sorry that I go off the path,
Go
but
ahead.
I love this little joke by John Cleese, who said four prisoners were playing cards. One was cheating, so they kicked him out of jail. Yeah. And by the way, in dilemma language, this is called contextualizing. If you
Okay.
reverse text and context, it makes you very often laugh. The essence of a joke is very often to reverse check text and context, right?
Okay.
But anyway, tourism is an important market. I hope we can discuss the game. And the game comes free for many countries. And then it's an in app purchase, I think, for
Okay.
we're working out the business model. I don't have a
But
clue.
it's coming soon, right? That's the
But
point.
very soon, in a month, we do the last test now. And it's 140 countries. So good luck.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for everyone who is watching, we will send out a link to that when it's available.
Yeah.
I'm very aware of time, Fons, but I do just have one final question, and that is a prediction on cross-cultural challenge for the future. Is it going to get more difficult or easier, and why? You have 1 minute. Go.
It is shifting. I feel that the national cultural differences uh, are a bit to the background. I think at the moment generational differences are tremendously popular. Obviously, gender in all the letters of the alphabet are getting interested, but still don't negate the national issue because if you take the gender issue, having three daughters and a wife, I get to know because I have friends who only have sons. What a difference in culture, right? Especially if they're not mixed.
Yes.
You become your own stereotype, right? It's a bit like a group of Dutch people going to Spain, you know what, or British going to Amsterdam. They become their own stereotype, right?
Yes.
Um, Never forget that if you have an old American female talking to a young Ghanese male, what is causing the issue? And the problem is the dynamics between the diverse cultures. Because the role of a man and a woman is defined quite differently in America than it is in Ghana. And then
Yes.
it's young and old, and it all mixes. And it mixes more than ever. So I come to a conclusion. Start with the issue. What is going on between the two or in a team between others? frame it as a dilemma, and then perhaps you're nicely informed. Oh, it's because half of the group is German and half is French, and gender is not important at all. Or, oh, and at the end, who cares? So I think it's going from monocultural issues or
Hmm.
monocultural diversity to intercultural, or what I call the diversity of diversity. And it's so complex that you should simplify it by saying, what is the issue? And then the training of the mindset, how to combine opposites. And there are trainings that are very effective. And servant leadership is one way of doing it on the leadership level. May I, one example?
Go
Uh,
ahead.
in HR, Motorola, okay, they died almost. But Bob Galvin was the son of the founder in the late 1900s when they were number one in the world, just
Hmm.
before Nokia. And he installed individual dignity entitlement. And it is, again, contextualizing how to become a servant leader. Every leader in Motorola had to have a discussion around five, I think six questions,
Hmm.
where the answer is yes or no. And things like, is the work you're doing for Motorola meaningful to you? Yes or no? Yes, fine. Do you have enough resources to do your task properly? No. Then it was the responsibility of the leader to make it a yes next quarter.
Okay.
Now, you
Wow.
can only be a servant leader if you follow that system.
Mm.
They made one mistake. That's why they asked us. 98% were yes, because they were counting the yeses and nos per individual, per unit, per department, per country. And 98% in Korea, it was a very badly operating group. And obviously, the answer is yes, dear leader. What was your question?
Always.
Right? They don't want to lose face. So we say we don't even have to go to Korea, but don't make the results public. It's
Hmm.
losing face. Now, Bob Galvin himself was a servant leader. That's why. So it is done by contextualizing, but it can also be done by training. What is servant leadership? How do you do it? It's all about asking questions. By the way, final point, AI, I realize myself 6 hours between around 6 hours when I have time. Uh, AI, it's about the quality of questions, not about the quality of answers. And the quality of questions will give you great answers. Um, the problem is, do you know if it's great or not? Um, so our educational system should be more focused on questions than on answers. And that's also an essential issue of servant leadership.
Thank you for that. And actually, that comes us right back full circle to where we were with the Q&A. Some really insightful questions, and I believe some really insightful answers as well. Thank you for your time, Fons. Thank you, everyone, for posting your questions. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Darko, to conclude our webinar today. Darko.
Thank you, Beck.
Thank you very much, Beck, and thank you very much, Fons, for these inspirations you have given us today. And I have to tell you something, as a passionate bridge player, I would never dare to kick someone out of the room anyway. So, but I
Yeah.
still have a couple of dilemmas. Maybe you can help us with a short answer. The first one is capitalism still in crisis?
I think so. Yes, it is. But there are alternatives to it. And for example, look at Singapore, where government and free markets have been combined. They have combined a social version of capitalism. By now, the GDP per capita in Singapore is twice as high compared to the UK.
So
You
there is
can,
way out.
yeah, but it's quite interesting to see that there are alternatives where because what troubles me in capitalism is the distribution of wealth. The index in what a CEO gets compared to a blue collar worker is unbearable. And it's not good for the world. May I advise to look at the video, YouTube video by Daniel Pink? What motivates people? I'm sure many of the listeners have seen it, but it is not about money. It is about mastery, autonomy, and purpose.
I
And
agree fully with you, and thank you for that one. And maybe the last one from my side, knowing you have written that book. What do you think? How far are we from finding the 21 leaders for the 21st century? So 24 years after this century
yes,
started.
I think already four of them passed away, and,
Okay.
and some I don't know. They're over 100. Yeah, I think we need to be very positive about the next generation. There's so much criticism on the young people. Yeah, and it's obvious on my generation, the baby boomers, but that's too obvious. But I do a lot of work with interns, and they are delightful. They're obviously a complete digitalized brain, but they are so spongy. They want to suck every information in. So let's say, for me, the 21 leaders still need to be born. No, not born. Ri-
Develop.
Mature, but there is so much talent in the young generation. I love them, and hopefully our work can help them a bit in becoming that type of a leader that is best metaphored by a good father or a good mother. It's not a weak person. A servant leader can be very tough, like a
That
good
means,
father can be severe.
excuse me, that means that we are leaving the world in good hands.
I think so.